Welcome to the GSMC Car Podcast, the show that takes you on a journey to the automotive world. We talk about the latest news, from new makes and models to new technology to all of the must-have options available. Whether you're a fan of the old classics, love the latest models and technology, or have never met a vehicle you didn't want to work on, the GSMC Car Podcast has something for every car enthusiast.
Welcome to the GSMC Car Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, David Lucy Mabel. All right, so folks, let's get started here. Today we are going to be discussing the Jaguar XJ. This is a European luxury car that, for some reason, and I have deduced perhaps of maybe because of the poor reputation that British cars have, this is a luxury car from Europe that has not been taken very seriously in the realm of luxury cars. Typically, when you think of European luxury cars, people tend to automatically think of the German powerhouses, Mercedes-Benz, BMW, Audi. Sometimes Volvo is included, but I don't know enough about Volvo. But Jaguar is just not really thought of very often. And I think that's rather sad because Jaguar has a formidable history that's stretching back over 90 years. So why exactly isn't Jaguar considered to be on the same level as Mercedes-Benz, BMW, and Audi? So today we are going to examine the flagship Jaguar luxury sedan, and we're going to compare it to the other luxury sedans from the likes of BMW, Mercedes-Benz, and Audi to see exactly how it stacks up. And specifically, we're going to be talking about a model of the Jaguar XJ that is no longer being produced. It's the 2003 to 2009 model, which is the XJ or the X350 and the X358 generation of the Jaguar XJ. And the reason why I'm doing this is because, some people might be considering buying one of these as a used car. And we want to essentially show that the Jaguar XJ is a viable used luxury car option, especially when it comes to buying a European luxury car. Because buying a used European luxury car that's no longer under warranty, could end up biting you in the rear end. So we're going to show today that Jaguar XJs are a formidable opponent to the German powerhouses that are so common on the used market and that so many people end up buying and spending copious amounts of money on just keeping on the road. So we're going to show you why the Jaguar is a good alternative to those cars. So let's get started. Okay, so in segment 1, we're going to be discussing the history of the Jaguar XJ. The Jaguar XJ has been Jaguar's flagship sedan since the 1970s. It was produced from 1968 to just recently, 2 years ago in 2019. So we had a good, we had a good 51 years of production there, if I'm not mistaken. 51 years of the Jaguar XJ. And it finally went out of production in 2019, perhaps because car manufacturers all across the world are switching more to crossovers now and are focusing less and less on sedans. So that's probably why the Jaguar XJ went out of production. There's probably a crossover that is meant to take its place as the flagship luxury car of Jaguar. There have been several variants, but there have been 5 basic platforms. Basically, how Jaguar has made the XJ. The XJ has always been sort of a confusing moniker for Jaguar because you had the XJ, which was the sedan, but then you had the XJR, which is the supercharged version of that sedan. But then you had the XJS, which wasn't a sedan at all. It was a coupe. Then you had the XJ220, which was a supercar and which actually held the record for the fastest car in the world at some point. So, like, XJ has always been a moniker for Jaguar that they just apply to anything. But for the purposes of this podcast, we're going to be discussing the XJ sedan because that's the one that is the most common, frankly, and that's the one that's the most viable of these options. The XJS is not a good car. And the XJ220 is extremely rare, and it's not a car that you're going to buy to daily drive. So there you have it. This podcast, like I said, will focus on the X350 and the X358 models. These are the ones that are becoming very affordable, and they are like $8 to $15,000, and they are about 15 to 20 years old. They're not horribly old, but they're definitely getting up there in years. But the thing is the technology. The technology was ahead of its time, and the engineering was ahead of its time. It's not like you're buying a 2004 Buick Park Avenue, like I own, that was engineered in 1996, and that happened to be produced until 2005. But basically, you're driving a 90s car that was made in the 2000s. If you buy a 2004 Jaguar XJ, you are buying a car that was engineered in 2003. So you're buying a much more modern car than if you were to buy, the equivalent of an American sedan. Because by that time, all the American luxury sedans were really just holdovers from the 90s. The Cadillac DeVille, even though the design was different, the mechanics were really carried over from the 90s. Buick Park Avenue, same thing. Lincoln Town Car, same thing. Chrysler 300 was probably the only one that wasn't carried over from the 90s, but then Chrysler 300, you wouldn't want to touch that with a 50-foot pole anyway, because Chryslers are just not good cars. Of course, you all know I got to sneak in, something, some shade against Chrysler in these podcasts, because, that's just my vendetta. I just can't handle them. So you got, these are the ones that are becoming the most affordable. $8 to $15,000 for a really nice one. You might pay $16,000 for something like really, really low miles, but typically $8 to $15,000 is what you're going to be paying for a Jaguar XJ of this time period. These Jaguar XJs competed against the likes of other European full-size sedans, such as the S-Class, the 7 Series, and the Audi A8. However, the XJ has had somewhat a troubled reputation over the years, and this is obviously due to the poor reputation that British cars have garnered over the said years. British cars, especially older British cars, have, it's a problem. It really is, because the British cars are beautiful. They're beautiful. They are very, I don't want to say well built, in the sense that they last a long time. They have very nice materials. They're very luxurious, and they feel well built. British cars have always had problems with electrics, especially. Electrics and build quality. Those are the main gremlins of British cars. I haven't really heard anything about British cars and their engines going bad per se, or their drivetrains being the problem. It's always the body of the car, and it's always the electricity. For example, we had a Jaguar S-Type. Our Jaguar S-Type wasn't a horrible car per se, but it just wasn't built well. The headliner was falling off. The interior was all chewed up. Just after a few years. Granted, the car was the car was maybe 11 years old when we bought it. It was a 2000 Jaguar XJ, S-Type, and then it was like 2011 when we got it, and then we got rid of it in like 2012. Like, that's how quick the turnaround was on that thing, because it just didn't hold up to what a luxury car ought to have been. The materials weren't very good, and the headliner, like I said, was falling apart. The paint was all chewed up. The car had issues with brakes, needed new catalytic converters. The car just was not a good car. I don't know if we happened to get a lemon, or if this is a problem with Jaguar S-Types in general. So you can see the reputation that Jaguar has because of its Britishness, because of its British heritage. British cars are not known for being good. Range Rover, for example. Range Rovers are junk. Range Rovers are junk. Land Rovers are junk. They do not last. These are the cars that you'll buy them, and then 5, 6, 7 years after you buy them and you have like 50, 60,000 miles on them, then electrical gremlins start taking over, and then you end up like Doug DeMuro and his CarMax Range Rover having to keep on going back. Thank God his was under warranty. Have to keep on going back and end up paying much more than the car is worth in repairs. And not because the engine or the drivetrain has gone bad, because of electrical gremlins. It doesn't make any sense. So the Jaguar XJ has had a poor reputation for reliability, which I find ironic in a sense. Because why is it that the Jaguar XJ is like the black sheep of the European cars when the S-Class has never been a reliable car? I mean, the S-Class, I take that back. The S-Class after the 90s, after the 80s, hasn't been a reliable car. The S-Class through the 90s was durable, but extremely complicated to work on. So reliability, not so much. The S-Class from 2000 to 2006, piece of junk. One of the worst Mercedes-Benzes ever made in the history of cars. The S-Class after 2006 to 2007 to I believe like 2012 or something was okay. And of course the modern S-Classes haven't been around for long enough to find out if they're reliable or not. But I can guarantee you they're not. The BMW 7 Series is probably the worst when it comes to reliability on these things. I mean, the BMW 7 Series is absolutely horrendous. After that Bangle butt era, they've all been horrible. The ones before that, the ones that were like sleek, like the shark nose ones from the late 90s, early 2000s, I heard they were fairly reliable. Granted, it's a BMW, so things are always going to go wrong anyways. But as far as, not grenading its engine, it was good. The Audi's another car company. Audi at this point is just fancy Volkswagen. Audi's all right in reliability, from what I've heard. I've never really driven an Audi. My friend Alana had an Audi one a few years ago that I drove around the block. That's the only time I ever drove an Audi, really. I never owned one. I've never experienced one. Hers was fairly reliable up until her turbo started to go out. And she had an A4. So I don't know too much about Audi. But considering that it's a German luxury car, it's bound to have problems anyway. So if the German cars have these problems, and Jaguar is a British car, and it also has these problems, how come people idolize the German cars so much, and they tend to leave Jaguar by the wayside? It's not like Jaguar has any less of reliability than the German cars. Maybe they're not as durable per se. Maybe their build quality isn't as stiff and as stuffy and as, really heavy and German-like. But that's not the only thing that makes a car. So why is that? I'm going to attempt to answer this, discrepancy here. So we already discussed how, Jaguar hasn't had the best reputation for reliability. But many people don't even consider them when shopping for a used European luxury sedan. The XJ. Now, I have to brag on the XJ for a bit. The XJ has a long lineage and is fundamentally different in philosophy from the German powerhouses that dominate the European luxury sedan market. The XJ, let me tell you all what the XJ is like. The XJ is light, it's nimble, it's elegant, it is spry, it is joyful. You hear this guy, Bill from Auto House of Naples on his Curious Cars channel. He once described a Mercedes-Benz S-Class. This was the W140 model, the one that was produced in the 90s. He once described a Mercedes-Benz S-Class as not having a sense of humor. And honestly, as facetious as this man was being, the car really does not have a sense of humor. The car, if it were a person, it'd be a mafia boss with a gun ready to shoot you. I mean, that's what a Mercedes-Benz S-Class is. It's very serious, very heavy. It's not playing any games. It does not joke around. It is a car. It is a luxury car. It is built well. It is meant to go 150 miles per hour on the Autobahn for 6 hours straight without breaking down. Granted, it doesn't actually do that because we already know, the Mercedes-Benz from this era was a Chrysler piece of junk. I mean, not good, but that's what it was meant for. And the car does not have a sense of humor. I have driven a 2003 Mercedes-Benz S430. And this thing is heavy. And it's not spry like my Buick Park Avenue. Granted, my Buick Park Avenue is not a lightweight car. I mean, it has what, Jay Leno would call road-hugging weight. But when you drive this S-Class, if you do not put your foot in it, the car will not go. It's like, nope, I'm not going until, it's aggressive. You have to be aggressive with the car. You have to, jam your foot into the accelerator. You have to manhandle it. And it's not that that's a bad thing. It's not that I'm, taking a crap on Mercedes-Benz S-Class over here. It's just the fact that the Jaguar is not like that. It's a lot more lighthearted and fun and easygoing because, down to the very construction of the car, it's made completely of aluminum. And there are some, steel bits in there. For example, the front and rear subframes are made of steel, obviously for structural support. But the entirety of the monocoque, as they say, the unibody of the car, is made of aluminum. Aluminum is a lot more lightweight than this heavy steel that the German cars use. Granted, there are benefits and risks and pros and cons to using aluminum construction. When you use aluminum is harder to work on. So when you get into a crash, aluminum doesn't hold its shape as well as steel does. But aluminum is also a lot more lightweight than steel is. And especially in this space age construction that they have with the Jaguar, in which the aluminum is formed and then it's riveted together and it's sealed with it's bonded with adhesives and other things of that sort. It keeps the car very light. So when you drive in that Jaguar XJ versus a Mercedes-Benz S-Class, you're going to be able to tell the difference. The Mercedes-Benz S-Class feels a lot heavier. It's a car. It's a driver's car, and you have to drive it. It's not something that you're going to feel disconnected from the road. You are connected to the road. And some people like that. And to tell you the truth, I commend Mercedes-Benz for being able to make you feel so connected to the road in a car that weighs almost 5,000 pounds. I commend them for being able to do that because some people like to feel connected to the road. I, on the other hand, don't like that. And I don't believe luxury cars should feel so connected to the road. I believe luxury cars should feel as disconnected from the road as possible. The reason being is because you pay for a luxury car for comfort. And I can tell you, between a Mercedes-Benz S-Class and a Cadillac DeVille, I've driven both, the Cadillac DeVille is more comfortable. It's maybe not as good of a car as far as driving experience goes. The Cadillac is kind of sloppy in its handling. It's loose around corners and whatnot. The Mercedes-Benz is a lot more, tight when it comes to driving. But it's not as comfortable. Not as comfortable. Definitely not as comfortable. It's a comfortable car, a very comfortable car. But when you get something like a Cadillac that rides like a cloud and then you can barely detect bumps in the road, that's how I feel a luxury car should be. And I'm not saying the Jaguar is disconnected from the road, but it is not as planted as a Mercedes-Benz S-Class or a BMW 7 Series or an Audi A8, just like these German powerhouses. This car is a lot more spry, it's a lot more lightweight, it's a lot more cheerful, and it doesn't require as much effort to drive. So, moving on. The XJ, like I said, has always been lightweight. And, honestly, this is really due to Jaguar's racing heritage. As you all know, the E-Type, the D-Type, all these great, racing legends from Jaguars that have existed in years past, all of those cars have passed down their DNA to the modern Jaguars. And I believe this generation of the XJ, the X350 and the X350A, is the culmination of what the XJ ought to have been for its entire history. So we're going to move on to segment 2 now, and we're going to discuss what makes the X350 and the X350A so special. I have already, kind of teased it in this segment, but you're going to hear the real reasons why next. So please stay tuned.
Are you a business owner? Someone interested in the latest news that might affect your business? Then check out the GSMC Business News Podcast, a show dedicated to keeping you up to date on all things concerning business, technology, and the stock market. Get ahead head start on the day as we keep you updated on the latest goings-on Wall Street, money, jobs, and technology. The GSMC Business News Podcast has you covered.
Okay, welcome back, folks. So here we are. We are in segment 2. We are going to be discussing what makes the Jaguar XJ, the X350 and the X358 models that were produced from 2003 to 2009, what makes them so special? And what makes them different, really, from the previous Jaguars that have not had a reputation for reliability on account of them being British cars. So, this generation was built in 2003 to 2009, like I just said, under Ford's ownership of Jaguar, which was called the Premier Automotive Group. Okay, now you all begin to understand why I have even advocated for Jaguar. Because this generation was built under Premier Automotive Group, which was Ford's luxury brands that they either had a stake in or that they owned outright. So during this time period, there was obviously Lincoln and Mercury, there was Jaguar, there was Land Rover, there was Volvo underneath the Premier Automotive Group that Ford, formed especially within their company so that they can focus on their luxury car offerings. And then Ford, it didn't really work out for Ford because all of these brands had vastly different identities. You had Lincoln and Mercury, which were pretty well known in the U.S., in North America, but not so well known overseas. You had Jaguar, you had Volvo, and you had Land Rover. I mean, Jaguar, Land Rover, and Volvo, I mean, those car manufacturers are not really related in any way, shape, or form. I mean, nowadays, Jaguar is connected to Land Rover, but it wasn't always like that. Besides the fact that they were British, they have two completely different identities. Land Rover is all SUVs and crossovers. And then Jaguar has always been luxury sedans. And at this time, Jaguar wasn't making an SUV. And not only that, Volvo was a Swedish brand. So Ford was trying to get these cars to share different parts and to share different components, obviously to save money. It just didn't work because they were independent car companies in their own right that just happened to be owned by Ford. So they continued doing their own thing. So eventually, Jaguar and Land Rover were removed from the bunch. They were sold to Tata Motors in 2009. And then Lincoln and Mercury were removed from the Premier Automotive Group like 4 years after it started in 2002. And then eventually, Volvo was sold off, and Volvo was one of the last holdings out of the Premier Automotive Group. But the reason why the Premier Automotive Group did wonderful things for Jaguar is because Ford has always had a better reputation for reliability on account of it being American than Jaguar being British. And I'm not saying that Ford makes the most reliable vehicles on the road, but Ford does make some pretty darn reliable vehicles. I mean, like, not all of them are, but you get yourself a Ford truck or a Ford Crown Victoria or, heck, even a Ford Fusion. I mean, so those cars that I just mentioned are all very, very reliable cars. And of course, depending on what year you get, some of the newest Ford Fusions have electrical gremlins and callbacks. I mean, not callbacks, recalls and all things of that sort. But for the purposes of this podcast, we are going to act as if though Ford is a very reliable car brand, and they are the ones that saved the reputation of the Jaguar XJ and really made it what it ought to have been, that Jaguar, when it was independent, couldn't do on its own. So, this generation of the XJ grew in size, which is important because the previous generation of the XJ, the X308 model, was rather minuscule compared to its German luxury car counterparts. I mean, it was small, it was dainty, it was elegant, but it was not a large car by any means. Well, it was important that Ford made this generation of the XJ to be larger, because then it would better be able to compete with the likes of the German cars. And it attained an all-aluminum body structure, once again for lightness. And though it was not perfect, no modern European luxury sedan is, the Ford construction and engineering did this generation a huge favor. These generations of the Jaguar, the X308, which I'm not focusing on per se in this podcast, but I have to mention it, X308, X350, and X358, are hailed for their reliability and durability, which are very odd words to use when describing a Jaguar. Nobody says, I want a luxury car that's very reliable and I'm going to go buy a Jaguar. If you want a luxury car that's very reliable, you'll probably buy a Lexus. Nobody says, I've got money and I want a reliable car that's going to last me 300,000 miles. I'm going to go buy a Jaguar. Nobody says that. Everybody says that when they're talking about a Lexus. Nobody says that when talking about a Mercedes-Benz either. So, why is that so? Why is that so? It's because Jaguar has had a horrible reputation before Ford took it over. But now that Ford is taking it over, the cars, from my research, and I've done extensive research on these cars for the past month in order to even prepare myself for this podcast, because I knew I was eventually going to do one on it anyway. And not only that, these cars are very durable, very durable. Parts are easy to find because they're all Ford manufactured, and it actually can compete against the likes of the German powerhouses because it's large enough, because it's luxurious enough, and there are enough trim models to warrant, direct competition with a Mercedes-Benz S-Class. And I'll get more into the trim models, especially in segment 3, in which I'm going to directly be comparing it to an S-Class. But it's extremely important for one to realize exactly what we are dealing with here. What we are dealing with, how important it is, and how extensive Ford's redesign and Ford's re-engineering of the Jaguar XJ was. It was a fundamentally different car. It just looked similar to the one that came before it, but it was a fundamentally different car. This car was offered in several trim levels, as well as a long wheelbase version. I guess we're going to get to the luxury trim options now. We got the XJ Vandenplas. The Vandenplas was the luxury version. You got the Super V8 Portfolio, which was like a Vandenplas and an XJR mixed together with a long wheelbase, and it was the Portfolio version, which was a limited edition that was offered in 2006 alone. And then, or was it 2005? I think it was 2006 alone. And the XJR was the sport-oriented version. And the Super V8, which was not the limited edition that came out only in 2006, the Portfolio model, the Super V8 was the most expensive trim. The most expensive trim essentially combined the XJR with the Vandenplas long wheelbase version. It had the supercharged version of the engine that was available in the XJR, but it was long wheelbase, and it had all the luxury trimmings on the Vandenplas. So if you had a Super V8 Portfolio Jaguar XJ, this is essentially a direct competitor to a Mercedes-Benz S55 AMG from that time period. That's a lofty title. Direct competitor to the S55 AMG, direct competitor to the Alpina B7 version of the BMW 7 Series, and a direct competitor to the Audi A8. Which were all the sport versions of these European luxury cars that I speak of. So, why is it that people gawk over a Mercedes-Benz S55 AMG, but they don't gawk over a Jaguar Super V8 Portfolio? And that's a question that I just don't know. But I know when these cars came out, I have heard reviews, is that they were criticized for being too similar in shape to the ones that came before them. To them, to the general public, this design was very old-fashioned. Old-fashioned, and it just wasn't sexy enough for the people who wanted one. who wanted a European luxury sedan. But boy, do those people know what they missed. Because here we are, and they say hindsight is always 20/20. Here we are, 15, 16, 17, 18 years later after these cars were produced, and we see how they hold up versus the German competition. I will say, I've been to a junkyard several times. I have never seen a Jaguar XJ in a junkyard. I'm not saying that they're the most reliable cars on the face of the earth, but I have never seen one in the junkyard. I have seen countless Mercedes-Benz S-classes, especially of the W220 models. I have seen countless, other sorts of European luxury cars. I've seen Audis. I've seen BMWs. I have never seen a Jaguar XJ in a junkyard before. Maybe it's because I wasn't particularly looking for them, but I have seen thousands of cars in junkyards. I've never seen a Jaguar XJ. Never. I'm not saying it's because those cars just don't die, but when you think of them compared to the ones that they're competing against, you had an S55 AMG or an S63 AMG. Boy, goodness, God help you when those head bolts begin to fail. And the S63 AMG, and it costs $56,000 to get your engine replaced, just like some person was quoted years ago about the Mercedes-Benz dealer. To buy an engine and to reinstall it into a car while removing the old one because the old one is junk because the head bolts have been stripped and the engine has grenaded itself. And it's going to cost you almost $60,000 to get all of that done. Goodness, at that point, it's not worth it. You buy a new car. Jaguar XJs, their engine was engineered by Ford. Platform, everything in the car engineered by Ford. That's something super easy to fix. And it's not like we're talking about the Jaguar XJ is just a rebadged Ford. No. This platform that they were built on is unique to Jaguar. It was not shared with any other car company within Premier Automotive Group that Ford created. It was unique to Jaguar. Just like the Mercedes-Benz S-Class platform is unique to Mercedes-Benz, 7 Series, unique to 7 Series. Audi A8, I can't guarantee that's unique to I can't guarantee that's unique to Audi because Audi and Volkswagen, basically Audi is just a luxury Volkswagen. Volkswagen is just a cheaper Audi. So I don't know about Audi. But the platform that this one was built on is unique to Jaguar. It's not like you're buying a rebadged Ford product here. You're buying a bona fide European luxury car that has proved itself over 60-something years. So get this. The specifications of this model. You had a naturally aspirated 4.2-liter V8 that produced 296 horsepower. This was in the XJ and the Van den Plas versions. The Super V8s and the XJRs received a supercharged version of that engine that made 395 horsepower. So you got almost 400 horsepower in a lightweight aluminum car. I would be remiss to say that you would not be flying down the road in a Jaguar XJ, especially with a top speed of 155 miles per hour. Not every car can claim that. Moving on. Other specifications include 303 pound-feet of torque, rear-wheel drive, 6-speed automatic transmission, and 0 to 60 in the 5 to 6 second range. The top of the line one, the XJR, as far as performance goes, did 0 to 60 in 5.5 seconds. And I'm assuming the slower ones probably did 0 to 60 closer to 6, maybe 7 seconds. So those are formidable numbers. But these numbers don't mean anything until we get to segment 3, in which I'm going to directly compare them to the Mercedes-Benz S-Class, the BMW 7 Series, and the Audi A8. So please stay tuned, folks.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching.
Hey!
The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be, visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Okay, so welcome back, people. In segment 1, we discussed the history of the Jaguar XJ. In segment 2, we discussed what made the Jaguar XJ so special. And in segment 3, we're going to discuss how it stacks up against contemporary German vehicles of the time period. And I shouldn't probably say contemporary, the competitors, because the Jaguar XJ was not German. It was a British car. But we're going to compare it against the other European luxury powerhouses, especially the German ones, which have been the most famous over the years. So let's see. We're going to start off with the Jaguar XJ base. Let me reiterate these specs. At first, when new, and we're going to talk about only the base models here. We're not going to be talking about the top-of-the-line models, because top-of-the-line models get a bit dicey as far as how much they cost go. Because, at that point, you can do some custom things and other things of that sort, so it's rarely ever standardized. So we're starting out with the base. So these are the base models of these cars that were the cheapest version available when they went on sale. 2006 Jaguar XJ base cost $61,830 when new. In 2021 dollars, adjusted for inflation, that is $80,875.03. It was rear-wheel drive. It had 294 horsepower in a V8 that was 4.2 liters and 303 pound-feet of torque. It was a 6-speed automatic transmission. No manual was available, and neither was a manual available in any of these cars. It got 18 miles per gallon city and 27 highway, which, owing to its lightness, the car was actually surprisingly fuel efficient because of how light and nimble it was. It wasn't something that had road hugging weight. It was something that was supposed to traipse along the surface of the road instead of hugging it and absorbing the road like so many other cars do that are very heavy. The curb weight was 3,726 pounds. To put that into perspective, that's less than my Buick Park Avenue. And my Buick Park Avenue is not even a European luxury sedan. My Buick Park Avenue is about 3,800 or 3,900 pounds curb weight. So it had a length of 200.4 inches, so about 16.7 feet. That was the 2006 Jaguar XJ base. Let's move on to the 2006 Mercedes-Benz S430. In this year only, I must say, the S350 was offered as the base spec in the North American market, but the S430 was the base from 2000 to 2005 in all other years and all other, places where they were sold in North America. So that's why I'm doing the S430 instead of the S350, because stacking the S350 against the Jaguar XJ is just not fair. But the S430 was $77,250 when new. In 2021 dollars, that's $101,044.73. And then you add rear-wheel drive, and this one produced 275 horsepower out of a 4.3-liter V8 and 295 pound-feet of torque. It had a 7-speed automatic transmission. It got 17 city, 26 highway as far as miles per gallon. There was a curb weight of 4,160 pounds and a length of 203.1 inches, which is 16.9 feet.
the 2006 BMW 750i. $71,800 when new, adjusted for inflation, $93,916.01, rear-wheel drive, 360 horsepower from a 4.8 liter V8, and 360 pound-feet of torque. And there's a 6-speed automatic transmission. 4,486 pounds was the curb weight, and at a length of 198.4 inches, which is about 16.5 feet. And then, last but not least, you have the 2006 Audi A8. The Audi A8 was $68,138 when new, so which is about $89,115.57. It had all-wheel drive, which is the only one of these cars to come standard with all-wheel drive. 335 horsepower, 4.2-liter V8, 317 pound-feet of torque. 6-speed automatic transmission, 17 city, 24 highway, miles per gallon. Curb weight was 4,288 pounds, and the length was 199.3 inches, which is about 16.6 inches, or 16.6 feet long. So now that I've spewed out all these numbers and these specifications at you, let's actually look at the breakdown of this. From these numbers alone, one can deduce that the S-Class is the most expensive and the most luxurious, not performance-oriented. The S-Class here, the S430, has the lowest horsepower rating and the lowest torque rating. And this is not necessarily a problem. It's just, like I said, the S-Class road-hugging weight. The S-Class is one of the more, is actually, let's see, concerning the S-Class and the BMW 750i. The S-Class is lighter, and it's also lighter, ever so slightly, than the Audi A8. So this one was not as heavy as the other ones, but it also wasn't as powerful. It was meant to cruise down the road. It was not meant to beat, any records at the Nürburgring or anything of that sort. That's something that the S600 would have done with its V12 engine, or an S633 AMG with whatever it had. I think it was a V12 AMG engine or whatever. So those are the ones that, were the speed demons of that era. The S430 was pretty much a regular, everyday luxury sedan in the way that it handled and the way that it performed. It was not anything fancy as far as performance goes. So we can deduce that the S-Class was the most luxuriously oriented of them all. The Audi and the BMW are more sport-oriented, with the BMW being the next most expensive. So the Audi, especially with its all-wheel drivetrain, and the BMW with its 360 horsepower in its base model, which was the 750i, these cars are the ones that are more sport-oriented. These are the ones that you're going to drive, you're going to take corners with, you're going to feel confident in driving on a track and something like this, despite its huge size. Because the BMW was the most powerful, but also the heaviest of all of these cars. The BMW was the one you wanted, and the BMW has always had a reputation for being a driver's car. BMWs have always been driver-focused cars. These are the ones that people want. These are the cars that people want if they're going to be driving, tough and putting their car through its paces and driving the car hard and other things of that sort. You're going to want a BMW or an Audi. The Jaguar, however, is considerably cheaper than all of these. Let me put that into perspective. The most expensive is the Mercedes-Benz S430, which in today's money would be about $100,000. The Jaguar was about $80,000. And we're talking about the car that's more powerful and has more torque and better fuel efficiency and is lighter than a Mercedes-Benz S-Class. So for all intents and purposes, for driving purposes at least, the Jaguar is the one to go. The Jaguar is the one you want. And it's $20,000 cheaper. $20,000 cheaper. At this time period, $20,000 can buy you a Toyota Camry. So it's one Toyota Camry cheaper than the Mercedes-Benz S-Class. That's crazy. And it almost strikes you as almost skeptical of what claim do the German automakers have to have so much value attached to their cars, to have people pay so much money for their cars, when there are other cars from other brands, from other countries, that are objectively better on paper. What claim does Mercedes-Benz have to offering a slower than all of its competitors' car, least powerful, and the heaviest, or not the heaviest, heavier than a lot, for $101,000 in today's money? What claim does Mercedes-Benz to have to offer a base model at that price period? It's ridiculous. It's no car with those credentials should ever be that expensive. When you can get a car that is objectively better for $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 less. You could buy the top of the line Jaguar for just over 10 grand more than you would buy a base model Mercedes-Benz. I don't understand. I don't understand. And I still don't understand what the hype is about Mercedes-Benz. Yes, they invented the car. Yes, they make great luxury cars. Yes, they're worldwide. But at the same time, if you're crying for reliability, you're crying for durability, you wouldn't buy a Mercedes-Benz because they're not reliable. Unless you're getting an E-Class or like a C-Class, and not even all C-Classes, Mercedes-Benz's far and wide are not reliable vehicles. They're durable, as in they last a very long time, but they don't last a very long time functioning properly. The body of the car will remain very straight. The interior will remain very good because they put the best materials in those cars. But as far as the engineering goes, all of them are over-engineered. There's no reason why an S-Class from this time period should cost $101,000. But it does. So now, considering here we are 10, 15, 20 years later after these cars have been produced, we have to ask ourselves the fundamental question now. Which car am I going to buy if I want the most bang for my buck from a European luxury sedan? And I would answer that question, I would dare say, buy a Jaguar XJ. Because the Jaguar XJ, you don't have to worry so much about reliability because it's manufactured by Ford. You don't have to worry so much about parts availability because, well, it's manufactured by Ford. It's a lot better performing than the Mercedes-Benz S-Class, which is probably the go-to for people who want European luxury sedans that are expensive. It's probably the go-to. It's a lot lighter and a lot better performing than that. And you have to consider the personality of the car as well. Mercedes-Benz S-Class, like I said, it doesn't have a sense of humor. It's a car that goes when you want it to go, but you have to work for it. It requires effort to drive. It is not effortless. If you want something that's a bit more spry, a bit more elegant, a bit more joyful, you get yourself a Jaguar XJ. Made of aluminum, almost 300 horsepower in the base model, 0 to 60 in like 5 to 6 seconds. I mean, this is a car, you can play with it, you can have fun, you can, zip in and out of traffic. It's nimble, it's lightweight, it's joyful. It's almost juvenile. It's almost youthful. It's youthful. That's the word I'm looking for. The car is youthful. It's not like an old, stuffy, old German man that's, everything is very serious. That's how the S-Class, everything is very serious. Everything's serious in the BMW. Everything's very serious in an Audi. Even though the BMW is the performance-oriented one of all of these. But, it's very serious. It's very serious. I want to perform. I'm going to take this very seriously. Like, it doesn't have to be that serious. It doesn't have to be that heavy. It doesn't have to be that, that way. It doesn't have to be like that. But that's how the German luxury cars tend to be. So we're going to move on to segment 4, in which I'm going to discuss my personal thoughts on the Jaguar XJ.
Do you work in the world of marketing and advertising? Are you a media buyer or the owner of an agency? Have you been looking for a podcast to help stay on top of all the goings-on of those worlds? The GSMC Marketing News Podcast is dedicated to keeping you up to date on all things concerning marketing and advertising. Get the latest marketing news, from what major businesses have planned for the coming year to the newest trends in advertising, from podcasts, digital and streaming, to the old standbys of radio, television, and billboards. The GSMC Marketing News Podcast has you covered, whether you're a marketing agent or a business trying to expand your brand.
Okay, welcome back, folks. So here we are discussing the likes of the Jaguar XJ, and I'm going to give you my personal thoughts on this car model. So, moving on. To preface this, I have recently gotten a new job. I was working over at the news station, and I decided that it was going to take too long for me to get where I wanted to get, as far as experience goes, as far as the money I was making. And I was like, you know what? I want to move out of my house. I want to, be an adult again, because COVID had me come back home and living with my family. And I love my family, but I need to get out on my own again. So I had decided to take up a managerial position with the company that my dad works for. And because I'm studying for my master's degree, I have decided to, take on this managerial role. Granted, it's going to be very challenging, but it's going to give me, enough experience that I'm going to need to move on to other things in the future. So that being said, I have accomplished this milestone in my life, getting a proper job that's going to give me a proper amount of money that I'm going to be able to move out and live. So I'm starting to get my finances in order. I'm starting to save money more aggressively. I'm starting to, really consider how I'm going to live in the future, considering my house, considering a future family, considering, even everything that everything that I do. How am I going to manage my finances? So I decided that I need to find a way to build my credit. And a good way to build your credit is to buy a car and to have a car payment. After you get approved for a loan to buy a car, you pay off the payment every month in order to build up your credit score. I have been in the market for a car. Now, I have gone through so many vehicle searches for me to finally figure out what on earth I wanted. I saw a 1998 Cadillac Fleetwood Limited for sale in Tampa. One of 471 made over 2 years. Oh my gosh, these cars are legend to me. I have always needed one of those cars in my life. I need one so badly, but obviously by the time I was going to get the new job and get the money and everything for me to purchase that car, it's already been sold. And I don't blame the person who saw it, because that's a car, you get it, it's a once-in-a-lifetime experience. You buy it, you may never see another one again. I have never seen one in person, and there are 471 of them made. So, I've never seen one in person, let alone seen one for sale very often. That was only the second or third one that I had ever seen for sale on the internet. So now, mind you, after that one was, gone, I decided, I was like, okay, I've got an older front-wheel drive sedan, luxury sedan from GM. I want something that has a different driving experience, but that is still luxurious and that is still classy. Because I want my cars, above all else, to be classy, because I'm the type of person, anybody who knows me knows that I like classy things, knows that I don't mean to brag, but I have a classy aura around me. I dress nicely. I've got this, British gentlemanliness to me. And I needed something that was going to capture my personality. I figured that I wanted something much more modern than my car because I couldn't deal with something else that was old and that could have broken down, is going to take 2 days to get an obscure part for because they just don't make them anymore and they've been discontinued because the car was engineered in 1996. I mean, that's some of the foolishness that I've gone through with my car. Granted, parts are still very common, but some obscure things like plastic tubing and whatnot, if you don't go to the dealership and look at an engine diagram and point to the part that you need for them to put an order for it to come in 2 days later, I mean, you're just not going to get the part. And that's infuriating. So I didn't want another car that had technology that was 25 years old in it. I wanted a car that was engineered and designed in the 21st century, which is a lot to say because, most of my cars have not been designed in the 21st century. So after considering, I considered, I've got a list of cars that I considered. So I'm going to pull up the list that I have. I considered a Toyota Crown, which, as you all know, I live in the United States. Toyota Crowns were never sold in the United States. So I would buy a right-hand drive Toyota Crown, like a Toyota Crown or a Toyota Crown Majesta from Japan. I wouldn't get an import. I'd buy one that was already imported, already legal in the United States. But then again, that car would have to be at least a 96 or before in order to comply with the 25-year rule. So I'm going to go buy a 25-year-old car when I've got an 18-year-old car. Not very smart. Cadillac Fleetwood Brougham. The ones I want is also 25 years old. The newest ones are 25 years old. So going to buy a 25-year-old GM product, I mean, not necessarily a bad investment because these Cadillac Fleetwood Broughams are very, very, very well built and very, very, very reliable, but it's a question of parts availability. It's hard to find these cars in junkyards because they are really classic cars. They are classic cars, real classic cars. It's hard to find them in junkyards. Parts might become more rare and more expensive, even though they make tons of B-body platforms. I mean, it may not be worth it because I already have an older car that I have to buy parts for because it's, pushing 160,000 miles. Cadillac Seville STS. Once again, an old car. I want a 1995 Cadillac Seville STS. 300 horsepower to the front wheels, super sleek bodywork, very, very, very nice car. You can learn more about that in my car podcast on the Cadillac Seville, the Aspiring European. I considered a Mercedes-Benz E-Wagon, but I wanted a Mercedes-Benz that was before the Chrysler era, so that puts me at a limit of 2002. I have to get one that's 2002 or older. 2002 is older than my 2004 car that I currently have now. So, once again, I don't want a car that's super old because my car is already getting super old. I don't want two super old cars. Buick Regal Tour X, outside of my price range. Outside of my price range, can't afford it. Buick Lucerne CXS. Buick Lucerne CXS is the next iteration of basically what is the Buick Park Avenue Ultra. As you all have heard me speak about, the Buick Park Avenue Ultra was a top-of-the-line Buick for 2004, 2005. It was the top-of-the-line Buick for, from 1997 to 2005 in my generation. Top-of-the-line Buick, it was appointed like a Cadillac, but it was a Buick. Well, after they had changed the Buick Park Avenue into the Lucerne the year later, there were several different trim levels of the Lucerne, which would coincide somewhat with the Buick Park Avenue. The Buick Park Avenue had a base model, and it had the Ultra. The Buick Lucerne had the CX, the CXL, and the CXS. The CXS was the top of the line, and which it was end up changed to the Buick Lucerne Super, but this was essentially the same car. It was powered by North Star V8 that produced about 300 horsepower driving the front wheels. That was the Buick Lucerne CXS and the Buick Lucerne Super. So that's the one I was considering. It's hard to find these cars in nice condition, however, because they're very reliable. And even with a North Star engine, they've been very reliable. So I was always going to want to buy one with less than 100,000 miles on it. It's very difficult for you to buy a Buick Lucerne CXS or a Buick Lucerne Super with less than 100,000 miles on it. It's hard to find those. And that would have been a more modern car, but at the same time, me being the car enthusiast that I am, I'm not sure if I want another front-wheel drive GM luxury sedan. I've been driving front-wheel drive GM luxury sedans my entire life of driving. Like, I want something different. I'm not going to get rid of my Park Avenue, but I want something different. I want to get something with rear-wheel drive, and I was considering something else. Now, I decided to look at Cadillac DeVille DTSs. Cadillac DeVille DTS, basically the top-of-the-line Cadillac as far as performance. Well, top-of-the-line full-size Cadillac. Top-of-the-line Cadillac during this time period was technically the Seville, but the Seville STS would have been the most expensive Cadillac. But this is the top-of-the-line DeVille for Cadillac. 300 horsepower, I have lusted after these forever. Then again, like I said, front-wheel drive GM luxury sedan, I already have one of those. Lexus LS. I have looked at quite a bit of Lexus LSs because that's something that more fits of what I'm wanting. More European-esque, even though it's Japanese. And very reliable, front engine, rear wheel drive configuration. A Lexus LS, great car. Toyota Avalon, front wheel drive car. And plus, for the money, I want something more luxurious. You can buy a Toyota Avalon for 10 grand, or you can buy a Mercedes-Benz for 10 grand, and both, depending on the model, would be fairly reliable. So I'm not going to buy a Toyota Avalon, because the Toyota Avalon, like I said, I've got a Buick Park Avenue. It's too similar. Front-wheel drive V6 luxury sedan. I've already have one of those. And Lexus GS, which is like the American version of the Toyota Crown, built on the same platform. But the GS that I want is hard to find. I want a GS 400. And the GS 400 is at least 20-something years old. So another old car. So why did I say I was going to talk about the Jaguar XJ if I didn't actually talk about the Jaguar XJ? Well, I considered that my next car would be a Jaguar XJ. And I know this might come as a shock to people who know me, until they see the car, that is. Then they're like, oh yeah, that's totally a David car. But it might come as a shock to people who know me, because after our experience with our Jaguar S-Type, was a terrible car. It was not worth the money that we paid for. I think we paid like $3,800 for it in like 2011. It just wasn't worth it. Not worth the trouble. Not worth the trouble at all. However, this car is fundamentally different from the S-Type. The S-Type is basically a platform shared by Ford. It was shared by the Lincoln LS and the Ford Thunderbird of the time period. And the Lincoln LS, as you all knew, had its own host of issues as well, in which I should probably do a podcast on the Lincoln LS because I just don't know enough about that car. And I would like to learn more and tell you all about it. But it just wasn't a good car. The X-Type from the time period was a rebadged Ford Mondeo from Europe. A horrible car. And it was ugly too. But the XJ, however, the XJ was a completely unique to Jaguar platform, and it had a very reliable engine that was engineered by Ford. It had a 4.2-liter V8 dual overhead cams it was an aluminum construction. Very lightweight, very durable engine. And I joined the Jaguar XJ lovers group for the X350 and the X358 model on Facebook. And I've seen these stories of these people driving these cars to 250,000 miles with just regular maintenance. The biggest issue that I have with the Jaguar XJ is probably maybe the air suspension is a problem, because it has 4 air struts in all 4 wheels of the car. And that, after my experience with an air suspension failing on me in my dad's Mercedes-Benz S-Class, I'm a bit wary about European air suspensions. But they say that it's a lot simpler than the Mercedes-Benz, and it's not an active air suspension in the sense that you can control the damping settings. It's automatic in the way that GM's air suspension is. It's a ride leveling system. So when the car is on and it detects bumps, it adjusts the suspension to keep the car level. It's not like a suspension in which you can press a button and then the car raises, or press a button and the car lowers. It's not that sort of air suspension. It's a ride leveling system that uses air to level the ride of the car. My Buick Park Avenue has the same concept in the rear wheels as well. A ride leveling system over the rear wheels that uses air to control and to level out the car. And when the car is off, the air pressure is let go and then the car rests. It's not the same thing as the airmatic suspension in the Mercedes-Benz, which maybe this is just me rationalizing what could be a very bad decision, but I genuinely don't think it's a very bad decision. I took a chance on a Buick Park Avenue because we've never owned Buicks before. I was the first person in my family to own a Buick. I took a chance on a Buick Park Avenue, and I have not regretted it a single day of my life since I have bought that car. To the point where my aunt, after I had my car for about a few months, she had told me that she wanted a car just like mine, so she went out and bought a Buick Park Avenue Ultra as well that looks almost exactly like mine. And it's done her nothing but good. So I am the type of person, before I buy a car, I don't buy a car based on emotion alone. I buy a car based on extensive research. I have done extensive research, and I have found out that these Jaguar XJs are actually fairly reliable. Now, I can tell you why I want one. You know, I want a nice car that's more modern. I already discussed that. I want a different driving experience. After driving my dad's E-Class, which... that Mercedes-Benz E-Class from the early 2000s, like I said, I will sing that car's praises from the dawn till the setting of the sun. It's the car that every car should strive to be. Not too complicated, not too expensive, very durable, and very fun to drive, but not too fast either. That's what a Mercedes-Benz E350, like the one my dad has, from 2000 E350, that's how every car should strive to be. It is a absolute joy to drive this thing. It's not heavy like an S-Class. Granted, you still have to put some effort. It's a German car. I mean, everything's a bit tighter, but it's built extremely well. The interior holds up wonderfully. The body of the car is very tight. Everything, the panel gaps are just perfect. It's a perfect little vehicle. That's how every car should strive to be, like a Mercedes-Benz E-Class from that time period. And I fell in love with the rear-wheel drive drivetrain because when you press, even though my Buick Park Avenue is faster than that Mercedes-Benz, but front-wheel drive cars just don't hit the same way. When you accelerate, it has a transaxle going to the front wheels. I mean, it lags, and those cars tend to go through motor mounts because you've got a lot of weight over the front of the car. It's not ideal to have a front-wheel drive car. When you have a rear-wheel drive car and you press the accelerator, the car goes. It goes almost instantly. My car lags a little bit, especially that it has broken engine mounts. Probably wasn't like that when it was new. But I'm tired of the front-wheel drive thing. I'm tired of the front-wheel drive. I want to experience a rear-wheel drive sedan that I could drive whenever I want. I want to experience a rear-wheel drive car because I'm a car enthusiast and I like cars that handle well. And I love cars that are nimble and that are spry. I like heavy cars too, but I want something that's a bit more sporty, that's a bit more nimble, that's a bit more spry, that I can enjoy and have some fun with. And the fact that I am a manager and I am in a higher up position, I have to have something nice that I can show off. I mean, not to say that my Buick, if I polished it and I got it, repaired and all of its little, quirks that it has, that it wouldn't be a nice car. But there's something about driving a European luxury sedan. And I'm surprised that I'm the one to say this, but I want something that I could show off with. And not only that, the styling has aged extremely well. The Jaguar XJ has a timeless design, with those quad headlamps up front, with those sleek body lines, those chrome strips around the bumper, and another thing, not only has the styling aged well, the styling is similar to a Buick Park Avenue. It's similar to a Buick Park Avenue in the sense that it has the chrome strips, it has the body lines, it has the creases where the creases ought to be, and the rear end and the front end of the car, taper in very much the same way. The Buick Park Avenue, like it was said when it was first introduced, had a very Jaguar-esque shape. It looks like a big cat, just like a Jaguar does. And so the fact that I would have a Buick Park Avenue and a Jaguar XJ, these cat-inspired cars, I don't know. The fact that I would have two cars that match each other, it just, it tickles my fancy. I kind of like that idea. But to tell you the truth, it's a Ford vehicle. Parts are readily available, and it's more serviceable. The W220 S-Class is a disaster. Chrysler design and engineering. The BMW is another disaster. Valve seals tend to fail, causing massive engine damage. The Audi A8 is another massive it's another mess of techno-wizardry, and the design is very bland. So between the cars that I have discussed, as far as European luxury cars go, I think the Jaguar XJ, for at least my purposes, for someone who wants something that's a bit lighter, something that's a bit more spry, a bit more responsive, something that requires less effort to drive than a German vehicle, I think the Jaguar XJ is what I could do. Because I could go Japanese and get a Lexus LS, but the Lexus LS from that time period, the design, I just don't care for it. Like, I love the car. It's a good car. I know it's a good car. But the design, I don't care for it. It's very Jelly Bean-like. Very blobby. If I'm going to get a Lexus LS, I'm going to get one from the late 90s, in which I don't want a late 90s car anymore because parts are becoming hard to find. Cars are 20 plus years old at this point. It's not worth having parts or, trying to find parts for a car like that when you could have bought something more modern. And not only that, the Jaguar XJ, me being a fan of British culture and whatnot, it just makes sense. It makes sense that I would drive something as classy and as British and as classic looking as that. So there you all have it. That's my podcast on the Jaguar XJ and why it is a formidable luxury sedan. And don't let people say Jaguar's not good, blah, 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 German cars are the best, nah. Not so. Not so. You can buy a Jaguar XJ today and drive across country goodness. And I can't say you'd make it there in one piece, but you'd make it in a lot less pieces than you would in a Mercedes-Benz S-Class from the same era. So there you have it. You're going to buy a European luxury sedan. What I would suggest for anybody who buys a European luxury sedan, especially one that's 15 to 20 years old, buy a spare car. Have a spare car. And my spare car would be my Buick Park Avenue because that thing has almost never let me down. So there you have it. So, I hope you enjoyed this edition of the GSMC Car Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Car Podcast Network, or GSMC Podcast Network. I've been your host, David Lucy Mabel. Please follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Apple Podcasts, and so many of the other podcast networks that are out there. So thank you so much for listening, and have a good night.
You've been listening to the GSMC Car Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type GSMC into your favorite podcast app to find all of the shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, from business news to weird news. Please subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you've enjoyed today's episode.